Welcome back. This is Real Britain with me, Emily Carver. Now, a surprising number of people in younger generations believe that women's rights have gone too far. New research conducted by Ipsos and the Global Institute for Women's Leadership at King's College London found that over half of people in younger generations, that's Gen Z and millennials, believe the push for equality is now negatively impacting men and that they are being expected to do too much to support progress. Very interesting indeed. Joining me to discuss this is Joseph Robertson, director at Orthodox Conservatives, as well as the author and broadcaster Amy Nickel. Now, Amy, have women's rights gone too far?
OK, so where to start, frankly? It's nice to see that the man hasn't bothered to come in the studio. I think that says quite a bit. Now, when you said a lot of men feel that women's rights have a negative effect on them, I think that's what we need to push away from. Men and women are allies in this struggle. Now, two examples stood out to me this week, which I think clearly demonstrate that while we do have equality, we don't always have it in practice. All we need to do is look at the fact that when we talk about gender-based violence against women, Jess Phillips did her speech this week. She read out the number of women killed by men. This speech lasted 5 minutes. And then just a few days before that, Kemi Badenoch stood up at the Committee about Menopause Support and said, oh, that's a left-wing concern, and just bashed down any possibility to reform the support that women get during menopause. That added to the old evergreen inequality topics, gender pay gap, disproportionate domestic burden, the childcare burden, things like the pink tax, the fact that I have to pay more for a razor than Joseph because mine's pink. I have to pay more for a plain T-shirt because I'm a woman. You're a mug for buying the
pink one, Amy.
You know, all these things. And what we've seen is if we stop pushing forward for women's rights, they can be taken away from us. And I think we've seen that in America with what's happened with Roe versus Wade. Women's rights aren't concrete. None of our rights are concrete. They can be retracted.
Well, that's very true. Joseph, you're a brave man coming on with two women to debate women's rights, but I'll let you have your view, certainly. Why do you think Gen Z and millennials think women's rights have gone too far?
Because they're finally realising that no one ever has tried to define what rights really are and where it all ends. And the problem is when you go along with such a loose term as rights without seeking to define what they actually are or what they're trying to achieve, you inevitably get bad actors who come in and take a good cause and malappropriate it for their own purposes. And this is what we found with women's rights. Sure, everybody in the world wants to see fair outcomes for women and wants to see equality of opportunity. But the issue is that that's not what it's all about now. It's all about equality of outcome in every metric, regardless of whether or not it actually helps women. And it's not really about women. It's about trying to get an easy ride for a lot of people. And I think that's the reality. Amy, brought up something that I think is a bit of a straw man, really, if we're going to debate women's rights. I don't think someone reading out the number of murders committed by predominantly men, which is the case in most crimes because men are generally committing the most crimes, is anything to do with women's rights.
We're talking about women that were killed because they're women.
I don't think they were killed because they were women. I think they were killed because they were vulnerable. And that's the job of the police to stop that. Wherever you have someone who's vulnerable, which is probably statistically more likely to be a woman, they need to be defended and protected. I don't think that's anything to do with women's rights.
Well, that's a nonsense. If Sarah Everard was a man, she would be alive today.
What, so you're saying that because of her gender, she's more likely to die?
Well, she was killed for being a woman.
Let me give
and how does that have anything to do with rights?
Because a man is rarely murdered on the basis of his gender.
So it's his right not to be murdered, is that what you're saying?
I think as women, we clearly have a right to safety. Feminism is about choices. I should have
everyone has a right
to be able to go out wearing whatever I want and not be at risk of getting murdered.
Right, well, let's come back to, because Joseph did make an important point there about the difference between equality of opportunity, which most people would support, and then equality of outcome. Because, Amy, I'm in very much, I could see both sides on this one, because sometimes women's rights means box ticking. It means quotas for jobs. It means all-female shortlists. It means, and sometimes it means demonising men when they don't necessarily deserve it. Can you see how some people might think that the whole women's rights movement has gone too far in asking for those things that amount to equality of outcome rather than opportunity?
I don't, because I think that when you position it like that men's rights are at odds with women's rights and vice versa, they're actually not. And dismantling the patriarchy would benefit both men and women, because it negatively impacts us both. There are negative impacts of it to men and women. I acknowledge that there are areas in which men have shortcomings, such as the criminal justice system, the family courts. But feminism wants to equalise that as well.
I think it depends on which feminist you talk to. But I'll come back to you, Joseph, but Amy, what does dismantling the patriarchy mean?
Taking apart a system that was founded to benefit men over women and giving men the underpinning control, and also reinforcing gender norms. They don't help anyone. So what's the most common people at risk of suicide is men in their 40s. Could that be something to do with the gender norm that is expected of them?
Well, Joseph,
there's a lot of pressure on men.
Joseph, why is that? I think young men in particular, with the rise of Andrew Tate and whatnot, are looking for male role models and perhaps finding them in bad places because they're not sure who they're supposed to be now. Are they supposed to be a provider? Are they supposed to be, more emotionally intelligent or whatever it is?
Well, I think men should just be allowed to be men, to be perfectly honest. Suicide rates have only rocketed in the male population since the sexual revolution of the 1960s and the absolute obliteration of male and female role models. I think what you're looking at now is what happens when people are taken outside of a practical social arrangement, which is that men should be allowed to fulfill their natural biological function and women should be allowed to fulfill their natural biological function. And if you want to talk about equality of possibility in this country, I mean, we've just had our longest reigning monarch who happens to be a woman. So if you really want to talk about patriarchy, I think you better choose a different country to try and do that in, because the top of the creme de la creme of our elite are very often female in this country. So I think if you really want to talk about, structures, maybe look to a different country to use an analogy there. I think if you're going to talk about, careers, let's look at bricklaying as a good example. I want to see quotas in bricklaying. I don't understand why more women aren't bricklayers in this country, and I've been saying this for a long time now. I think that there should be, less female quotas, for instance, at the BAFTAs, and perhaps more in bricklaying communities, because that would be a brilliant equality of outcome for everyone involved.
Well, there you go, Amy.
I mean, I don't... So, for example...
You should want equality across the board, including construction.
I would say I want equality of choice. And interestingly, on the way here, I was actually reading about a lot of sexist tropes within plumbing, and women don't have the access to plumbing, and maybe some of these...
But also, some women might not want to be plumbers.
But that's correct, and we should have the right to choose between what we want to do, but it's not...
And we do.
Mistaken. But it's still the case that there's a disproportionality between the jobs that we perhaps go towards because of gender norms.
Do you think, Joseph?
But I think we want to get rid of gender norms. I thought gender norms were bad.
Idea.
Joseph, I like gender norms to an extent. I think it's nice that men often want to provide and they want to be gentlemanly,
but they
and they want
feel
to be
that they have
protectors often. And I think it's nice that women are sometimes more nurturing, perhaps, in some of their relationships.
But they shouldn't feel like they have to either. It's about choice.
There is that. Well, I've forgotten where I was going now, but. So we're going to wrap it up there, because I was just on a roll.
It's all secular, isn't it? It's all secular, because at one point we don't want gender norms because they might be bad, and as soon as someone points out the obvious, we do want gender norms because they work and they're good.
They don't
and I think
work,
the reality is, if you
good.
Fight against biology for long enough, you end up getting to the point where you can't define what a woman is.
That's just a massive generalisation about what a male role is and what a male role isn't. Women's rights haven't gone too far because we currently don't have the right to the most basic thing, safety.
Also, I imagine a lot of people will be screaming at the television at home and saying, hang on, Joseph, we need to know what a woman is first before we can even comment, perhaps, on whether women's rights have gone too far. But thank you very much indeed, Joseph Robertson, Director at Orthodox Conservatives, as well as the author and broadcaster Amy Nicol. Thank you very much indeed. A little bit of a feisty one there. Two very, very different views. Thank you, Amy, for coming into the studio.